Hey everybody, it's Ed. Hey, let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons. What say? One of the newest setting books for Dungeons & Dragons from Wizards of the Coast is this one, Strixhaven, A Curriculum of Chaos. I pre-ordered this and got it not too terribly long ago. A couple of weeks, Cody, over at the Taking20 YouTube channel, did a review of Strixhaven, and I think it's fair to say he didn't like it very much. In his review, he talked a lot about expectations and how it seemed like his expectations weren't met by the Strixhaven book. And this video is a little bit of a response to his review. And I want to focus particularly on the expectations aspect of the review that he gave. If you're not familiar, Strixhaven is originally a Magic the Gathering set. Now, I haven't played Magic the Gathering in probably 10 years. I was only mildly into it when I was on tour. A friend I knew, we got into it and played it while we were touring around. But Strixhaven is a new setting, and it is a school of magic. You know, a magical school where you learn how to do magic. Have I over-explained that too much? Maybe. In his review, Cody talks a lot about how this magical school, Strixhaven, is extremely reminiscent of another magical school. Yes, that's right, Hogwarts. One of his biggest criticisms is that Strixhaven seems like it is just a reimagining of Hogwarts. In fact, at one point he calls it a parody of Hogwarts. I have to say I did enjoy the comment that it was like the Hogwarts you'd find at Kmart, or the Mega Blocks of Hogwarts. That was clever. But he talks about how a lot of the things in the setting and the adventure mirror Harry Potter and Hogwarts almost exactly. For example, you can duel. There's magical duels you can do between the students. There is a big magical ball that happens, which is only available to the upperclassmen. And he didn't even mention what I thought was the most glaring draw from Harry Potter, which was, in Strixhaven, you don't join different houses, you join different colleges that have different philosophies and approaches to how to use magic. And let me say that he is absolutely right on that point. Strixhaven is Hogwarts with not even the serial numbers filed off. They're just like mildly scratched, maybe buffed a little bit. But that's kind of what I was expecting. I mean, when I read the description for Strixhaven and it said a school of magic, I immediately thought of Hogwarts. And I'd be willing to bet that 98% of the people, when they heard that this setting was a school of magic, thought of Hogwarts. You know, like it or not, good or ill, these days, if you say School of Magic, unless you're a D&D player and you think of like Evocation or Illusion, you're probably going to think of Hogwarts. And so I guess that's kind of why I was surprised that his expectations weren't met. I'm not sure what he would have thought of or what anybody else would think of when you would think of a school where you're going to learn magic. As a matter of fact, from the book, here, let me put on my +2 glasses of seeing here. Right on the back here, it says, School of Magic is in session. That right there tells me this is Hogwarts. And again, that's what I was expecting, what I was looking for. The back here says, the greatest minds in the multiverse meet at Strixhaven University. Professors teach wondrous secrets to eager students, and life on campus is frenetic. But danger lurks even here. When campus hijinks mix with sinister plots, it's up to you to save the day. Sounds like a Harry Potter book right there. You can explore Strixhaven over the course of 4 adventures, which can be played together or on their own. That's another criticism that he had that I will talk about in just a minute. Each describes an academic year filled with scholarly pursuits, campus shenanigans, hidden dangers, friendships, and even romance. Yeah, that sounds exactly like the kind of things you'd find in the Harry Potter the role-playing game setting at Hogwarts. So yeah, this is exactly what I was expecting it was going to be. It's a school of magic where you can play a student at a magical school. Again, you can't say the word student at a school of magic without Hogwarts coming to mind. Yeah, I think going into the Strixhaven book without a little bit of expectation is going to be very Harry Potter Hogwarts-esque is kind of setting yourself up for disappointment. He also mentions that the adventure that goes along with the Strixhaven setting is very much like a Harry Potter book, or even maybe the whole series of Harry Potter books, in that it starts out kind of light, and he uses the word whimsy a lot. There's a lot of whimsy, which I agree, he is right, 100%. There's a lot of whimsy. Starts out very whimsical, very light, very much for like a younger group, and then as you go through the adventure, it gets darker and more serious as you go. Again, just like the Harry Potter books, that's kind of what I would expect from a very, very strongly influenced by Harry Potter book. Something else he said in his review is that it didn't feel like Dungeons & Dragons. It didn't feel like D&D. And I'm a little unsure of what he meant by that, to be honest. He says it doesn't feel like, Tolkien or Sanderson or Jordan. He also mentions it doesn't feel like R.A. Salvatore or Weiss and Hickman or like Ed Greenwood. Which, taking a step back, that's odd because when they first really started writing, got popular with their fiction, they were writing based on D&D properties. So he says that Strixhaven doesn't feel like D&D, but I'm kind of mystified and not sure what he means by that. Because what D&D feels like to anyone may be different to anybody else. I would also sort of submit that all of the D&D settings don't feel the same. Like, Ravenloft doesn't feel like Forgotten Realms, which doesn't feel like Eberron, doesn't feel like Greyhawk. To kick it old school, doesn't feel like Dark Sun, or doesn't feel like Planescape, or doesn't feel like Dragonlance World of Krynn, or doesn't feel like... what's another one? Spelljammer. These are all D&D, but they all have very different feelings within their settings. They evoke different kind of adventure ideas. They have different aims. They have different philosophies, different goals. And so, if you have all those different settings, I think this feels just as much like D&D as any of those do. He does say that he feels like this is aimed at a younger audience. And I agree entirely. I do think this is aimed at a younger group. As you probably have heard me say in one of my other videos, right now my main source of income is professional DMing for younger kids. And that is what drew me to this. I have a feeling a lot of my students will really enjoy doing a quasi-Harry Potter adventure. But again, that goes back to expectations. What do you expect from D&D? What feels like D&D to you? It may not be this. It's kind of like Professor Dungeon Master was saying in a recent episode of Dungeoncraft. By the way, if you're not watching Dungeoncraft, make sure you check that out. He's got some great videos. But yeah, I think this is aimed at younger folks, to get them into the hobby possibly. But I don't think he's wrong about that. I think this is squarely aimed at a younger demographic. Maybe not old grognards like myself. See, because to me, this is D&D. Anything that has an Errol Otis cover. Dungeon Crawl Classics notwithstanding. One other thing that he pointed out was they have gamified some NPC interactions. Because you are a student at a university, they want to add the feeling of being a student at a university into the adventure and into the setting. So they do have rules for studying. They have rules for taking exams, which is a part of, university life, at least best as I remember. There are consequences if you don't study or if you cheat. And if you do well, or if you even ace the test, you can get some bonuses that are in the game mechanically. There are rules about NPC interactions where you can become a rival to somebody, or you can create a bond, or they can even become a beloved. Now, that doesn't have to be romantic. It can be a very close friendship as well. And one of the things that Cody didn't like about that is that they have gamified, they put together rules of how to interact with these various NPCs. And okay, I can understand you may want your role-playing game, ROLE, to be less of an ROLL game. And you may want those NPC interactions to be more organic and be more natural and not be so gamified. I totally get that. However, D&D gamifies, everything. I know nothing about combat. I don't know how to put on armor. I don't know how to swing a sword. Definitely don't know how to cast Firebolt. But it's okay because I can do that because the game has gamified combat. So Ed may not know anything about combat, but that's okay because a Sterile Stormflutter, Mighty Knight, can attack an orc because he knows how to swing a sword. We've gamified that. Same thing with the NPC interactions. Maybe you have somebody that's very, very shy. Maybe you have somebody that's extremely socially awkward. Maybe you have somebody who doesn't want to do the role-playing. That necessarily shouldn't limit them to play a character who knows how to be very gregarious, very outgoing, very charming. I can particularly see that if this is aimed at younger role players, like, again, I think it is, and the way I will be using it, quite often, either because of shyness or being at an awkward age or not wanting to put themselves out there, they would be extremely reluctant to get involved in NPC interactions. So yeah, for younger players, I can definitely see that gamifying the NPC interactions would be extremely beneficial. Cody seemed to have a problem with the way they were marketing this book, and he did show a tweet where they talked about new spells, and new adventures, and new character options. And he is, again, 100% correct. It is very, very sparse. There are about, I think, 4 spells, and maybe 4 or 5 feats, and the adventure is the one that goes along with Strixhaven. And he is 100% right that it's hard to pull any of those adventures out and have them stand on their own legs. You really have to run it within the context of Strixhaven for it to really make sense. If you wanted to pull it out and use it on its own, you'd have to do a lot of back-end work, I think, to the point where it'd be easier maybe just to make your own adventure. But again, this is a setting book. You know, it's not meant to be Tasha's Cauldron or Xanathar's Guide. I don't think it's meant to have a whole lot of character options. I think like Eberron or any of the other setting books like Forgotten Realms, the character options that are in here go to serve the feeling and the intent of the setting. So yeah, maybe a little hyperbole, maybe a little over the top. There's not tons of new spells that you want to use with all your other D&D campaigns. Not a lot of other feats you'd want to be using. But again, I think that goes along with the way setting books usually work. I don't know how much of the Ravenloft things you would want to use outside of Ravenloft. Maybe you do. I have no idea. See, my problem with the marketing is a whole different line. I'm really getting tired of large $50 hardback books for modules or settings. I mean, I remember when modules were like this. Look at this. That was a module, kids. That's what I miss. This is what I want. I don't want another one of these every 6 months, okay? Hello, Wizards? They don't care. Now, this is not meant to bash Cody and say he was wrong and oh my gosh, don't listen to him. I think everything he said was actually very, very accurate. But I want to go back to the idea of expectations. If you got a book that said Strixhaven, that said School of Magic, what were you expecting? Because like I say, I feel like most people who read this are thinking Harry Potter or thinking Hogwarts. Exactly what I was thinking of. So when I got this, it fully fulfilled my expectations. Now, is it good? Is it bad? Well, I'll leave that up to you to decide. The adventure is okay. I will probably tinker with it a little bit to change it and make it more suitable to the people who are actually playing through it. But yeah, generally speaking, thought it did pretty well. Anyway, all that being said, I highly recommend you go to the Taking20 YouTube channel and check out what they have. They got some great content on there. By the way, I also mentioned Professor Dungeon Master. I recommend his stuff at Dungeoncraft. Extremely beneficial videos there. All right. That's me done. I will see you next time. Yeah, I'm just going to be a little bit of an old man here, but I'm kind of getting over the animal races. Again, that is one of the things that lets me know that they're really, really aiming for a younger demographic, which is fine. But yeah, cranky old man is like, enough owls, okay? Enough rabbits and fairies, and I'm personally not interested. The great thing about D&D is I don't have to use them.